All right. So, as Burke mentioned, Patrick Campbell, I'm CEO founder of a company called Price Intelligently. I'm going to walk through a little bit of what we actually do. My personal background, I started my career, I worked in US intelligence, and then I worked at Google. Interestingly enough, doing the exact same thing. One using data, data to hunt bad guys and gals. The other using data to basically hunt money. So it's interesting. If you work in the government, you can also work at Google, and we can talk about the ethics of all that fun stuff later. So moving on, what we're really going to talk about today is this whole concept of how retention and really to a greater extent, how the market is changing. And the really big reason I want to talk about this in particular is because I am not a customer success executive. I really, really value what all of you do. But it's one of those things where my biggest contribution to this community is really just kind of showing you exactly what's happening in the market, and at the very least justify why your jobs are so important, and at most hopefully light some fires under you in order to take it back to your teams and really talk about, hey, we really need to focus on this thing because all of the data in the market is suggesting that there are problems coming. So why do I have any authority to talk about this? Well, to give you a little bit of background on the company, we've been around for about 5 years. We're about 40 people out of Boston, entirely bootstrapped. We have 2 product lines. The original product line was a Price Intelligently suite of software. So we help companies like Lyft, Atlassian, Zora, a bunch of other folks in the SaaS and software ecosystem basically do data-driven pricing. And then our other software product, something called ProfitWell, where we plug into your billing system, whether it's Zora, Recurly, Stripe, whatever you're using, and give you free access to your financial metrics. So your MRR, your churn, all that kind of fun stuff. And then we have a couple of tools that sit on top of that solve for delinquent churn, your RevRec, a couple of other things. Not giving you this to kind of give you, a sales pitch. It's a really, really bad sales pitch, I think. But at this point in time, about 25% of the SaaS and software ecosystem is actually using our software. So at this point, we've actually seen inside more SaaS and subscription financial data than anyone else out there. And so what we're really going to walk through is a bunch of findings that we found that are really, really relevant to this particular community, and along a couple of axes here. So the first is really, really starting and talking about the market and talking about your customers, and in particular how they are getting absolutely hammered, and not in the good way. I was told to be PG. I hope that's PG. Is that PG? Okay, anyways. The second one is really how the market is dropping out beneath us. And that's just some things that we just can't control as operators and execs at companies. And then finally, and this is the one that's going to make you feel bad, so I hope you booked a massage for the next activity. We're making this a lot harder than it needs to be, and that's all on us. So there's going to be a lot of data. We're going to share the slides. Everyone's going to be able to dig into this data in particular. But this is something that I guess let's dig in on. Huh? We excited? Got it? It's going to be a lot of dad jokes. Get pumped. Not even a dad, just getting in training. All right, so let's talk a little bit about consumers. Consumers are just getting absolutely hammered. And what I mean by that is, if you think about software, you just think about products in general, 10, 15, 20 years ago, there just wasn't a lot around, right? The barriers to entry to actually build a product, let alone a good product, were so high. You needed computers in a room. That's my explanation of a server, because we're so far beyond that, I don't even know what else a server actually does, right? I'm just kidding. No? Okay, it's still coming, don't worry. Anyways, so what's happened in the past couple of years, just based on infrastructure and what's been happening just in kind of the infrastructure as a service space, is competition is now rampant. And what I mean by that is, if we talk to, I think we talked to about 1,400 founders and exec, and we asked them if they were, depending on their age, so we asked folks who were 5 years old, 3 years old, and 1 year old, so not even that old of companies, and we asked them, how many competitors did you actually have in the first year of doing business? And what we found is that overwhelmingly, those companies that started 5 years ago, they were averaging just under 3 competitors. Those folks today, they're looking at just near double digits. And what's fascinating is when we ask the same people, hey, how many competitors do you have today? And every single one of them now has double-digit numbers of competitors out there. And what's interesting about this is that you can still survive with competitors, right? But what's fascinating about the market is that now all of a sudden, they're just being bombarded by marketing. They're being bombarded by just all types of different products. And these are literally only the marketing technology products. There's so many other types of products out there. But these are basically the products that we're just selling to ourselves in order to grow more and more. And what's interesting is that has caused CAC to steadily increase. So your customer acquisition cost, and this is not necessarily something that affects the retention side exactly, but what we found is that over the past 4 years, CAC has basically grown by about 50%, both in the B2B and the B2C environments. And this is just because everyone's got ebooks, everyone's got salespeople, everyone's doing all the different things that we all used to do to basically get a head up on our competition. But basically, we're getting to this peak content and this peak environment where all of a sudden there's so much software out there, there's so many different pitches that are happening. So all of a sudden, consumers just have so much different choice. And what's fascinating even further is that the switching costs have actually decreased dramatically. So who in here, just to date a few folks, who in here bought software 10, 15 years ago? Okay. Who bought software 20 years ago? Okay, awesome. You do not look that old. You must work out. Geez, you look really young. Okay, anyways, I'm being serious. You look very, anyways. But what's interesting is that even a few years ago, when you looked at the total implementation time for a particular piece of software, it used to average just over 56 hours, or just under 57 hours to implement a piece of software into an organization. And this isn't just like getting hooked up. This is like, okay, it works, great. 5 years ago, still really, really high, about 46 hours. And then today, you're looking at average about 7 hours to implement a new piece of software. This is where you have marketing technology where it's made it really, really easy to integrate things out and integrate things in. And all of a sudden, consumers, with all of this different competition out there and all of this different pressure, they have so much more choice, which is amazing as a consumer, but it makes your job 10x harder. And what's interesting is that all of that is surmountable. You can have an amazing brand, you can have an amazing product, but there are just things happening in the market that you just can't control. First up, the relative value of features is declining. So to give you a perspective or a little bit of an anecdote, you could buy a Salesforce integration maybe 4 or 5 years ago. You'd have to pay like $1,000 a month for that particular Salesforce integration. Today, most products just include Salesforce integrations because that's what their products or that's what their consumers actually wanted. And because of that need and because software is relatively easy to build now, all of a sudden our consumers, they're not willing to pay much. So this is about 500,000 data points over the past 4 years, and what we're really looking at is something that cost 100% or whatever it was at 4 years ago is now worth basically 30% of what it was that four-year mark ago. And this is not including just integrations, analytics, and things like that. This is also core features normalized across a bunch of different companies. And if we look even further, what's really interesting is that consumers are getting so much pickier. If we look at NPS scores, what's fascinating is that the NPS score 5 years ago across B2B and B2C SaaS, it actually was pretty good. I mean, it's not great, right? We all want NPS at least over 50. That's kind of like the magic threshold. But 33, across all different types of product isn't bad. What's fascinating is that 3 years ago, consumers in aggregate are right around 20. Now 1 year ago, right around 10. And this is just fascinatingly ironic, right? There's never been a better time in software. Our jobs have never been easier. They definitely aren't easy. But it's fascinating that consumers just, they're like millennials. They're just never happy with anything, right? Dad jokes for days. Awesome. Cool. And so the other piece of this is that we as practitioners, we're building the wrong product. So it's not you guys in this room, but it's your product teams. Your product teams suck. I'm just kidding. They're great, but they need to improve. And the reason is because what's happening is a lot of the stuff that we're building that we think is going to work for expansion revenue, we think is going to work for retention, it's not actually working. So in order to display this point, I have to show a new visualization that you probably haven't seen before because we came up with it, not the 2x2, but the application of it. But when you think about value, there's two really big spectrums. There's the value of attributes. So if I think of a cup of coffee or a soda or something like that, there's the value of, do I like the taste versus do I like the temperature versus do I like the smell, whatever it ends up being. And then the second axis is actually willingness to pay. So we can take those two attributes and we can put them on a 2x2. And on the x-axis here, it's the value of different attributes. So meaning, how much do people actually value taste versus how much do they actually value the temperature? Those different attribute comparisons. On the y-axis here, we have willingness to pay relative to the median. So if I surveyed this entire room about the cost of a cup of coffee, we would get a median price point for the room, and then we'd be able to look at, okay, for people who really like temperature, what was their willingness to pay relative to that median? So what you end up getting are situations where if something is really, really highly valued, and a group of people are willing to pay more and more for it, you, my friends, have a differentiable feature. That is a feature that you can sell into an enterprise tier or even a middle tier to basically get more expansion revenue. Now, if you have a feature that has low value in aggregate, but has high willingness to pay, this is like an integration or analytics, you have an add-on. If you have something that high value, but basically low willingness to pay, that's table stakes. That is a core feature that you need to use to basically defend those particular customers. And then my personal favorite, low, you have trash land. Now, what's fascinating, to bring this back to your product teams, I asked thousands of your product counterparts, and I said, for the last N features, pick however many you want, where do you think your features were on this spectrum? So 5,000 inputs, that's where they think you're building your product. I then went to 1.2 million of your customers, and I said, where are these features actually? They're down there. So the scary part, and it's not in this particular deck, is that your product team is so confident. They are so confident they're building the right things. They have that one person that said that one thing in a drift or intercom message, and that's the justification for weeks worth of development. They're so confident. But in reality, they don't know anything. And the reason that they don't know anything, and that's being a little pejorative, it's being a lot of pejorative, but the reason that they don't know anything is they're not talking to their customers. They're not focusing on exactly what they should be building. And what we found is that when we talk to founders and we talk to executives, we're finding that we're focusing on the wrong fundamentals. So we asked over 1,000 different founders and execs, and we said, if you had one thing to focus on in your business, whether it be acquisition, monetization, or retention, you could only focus on one of them. Where are you going to put all your eggs in that basket? All about acquisition. 70% of founders and execs out of a group of about 1,400, all about getting more logos. They don't care as much about your job, keeping customers around. They definitely don't care about part of your job, which is making more money per customer. And what's scary about this is that we really, really don't know our buyers. And that's where the product teams are really, really messing up. And that's where I would say your entire business is really, really messing up. So just as a show of hands, how many of you have what are called buyer personas in your business? Okay, keep them up. Of you who have buyer personas, how many of you have collected willingness to pay data on your buyers? Okay. Shane, you don't count. We work with you. So, no, I'm just kidding. Okay. Okay. Anyone else? Okay, you guys out here. How many of you have relative value, like what features they care about? Okay, you're still up. Unit economics? Oh, you did? Oh, awesome. Cool. See, these are the best people in the audience, guys. No, anyways. Okay. So this is really, really, really important. And the reason is because these are the people who are buying your product. These are the people retaining your product. And if I had more time, I could talk through like how you can actually use this. But the reason that a lot of you don't have this in your business is you're not doing customer development. So nearly 68 or 70% of folks are talking to 10 or less customers in a non-sales capacity every single month. There are Fortune 500 tech companies in that group who are basically not talking and not doing their customer development. And then my favorite thing is that some PM or some product person comes up to me and goes, oh, you know what? We don't do customer development, but we do a lot of experiments. We do a lot of like A/B testing. Nope. Half of us are doing no A/B tests per month. This includes marketing experiments. How hard is it to send 2 subject lines? It's not difficult, right? But what's interesting is that a lot of us too are really just not focused on things like pricing or these different levers in your particular business. So we actually found that overall, most folks are spending less than 10 hours a year on their actual pricing. A lot of folks, the average number of time they actually have spent on pricing the entire history of their business is actually around 15 hours. And to give you a little bit of perspective, this is how much time you spend on custodial supplies. Like this is how much time you spend picking out your custodial supplies. You spend 11 to 50 hours a year. And this begs the question, or the statement of you spend more time picking out your toilet paper than actually on your pricing, which is kind of fascinating. The other thing, and this is another one to like really bring back to your sales teams, is that we let sales teams ruin our jobs. And I know it's like, yeah, dig in on the sales teams, like forget those guys, right? But hey, is that you? Okay. You work at a VC, you're not a sales guy, come on. Anyways, all right, we let sales teams ruin our job. And what I mean by that is we looked at a ton of data, and particularly discount data. And what we found is that what you're looking at here is the % discount along the x-axis on the initial contract. And then you have the willingness to pay relative to the original price point on the y-axis. So basically, if you have 30% or more discount authority in your business, like your renewals, like they're just making your job harder. It just doesn't make sense. And it's not to say that discounts, aren't something that you can use, but most of us, especially in enterprise or like B2B SaaS, we're just like, yeah, discount, just get the deal, right? When in reality, when it comes up for renewal at an annual contract, like you're not gonna get that deal anyways because you're basically fighting not just for expansion dollars, but just to defend the dollars that you already have. The other thing is we don't really do the basics, delinquent churn. So fun fact, 20 to 30% of your churn right now is actually because of failed credit cards if you're a credit card-based company. It's pretty scary just because it's the simplest part of churn that you can attack, and most of us just send like collection letters essentially to these customers, when in reality it's kind of like a marketing channel. And what's fascinating, and the reason I'm going through so many different data points, is because like there are really, really clear winners and losers within this environment. So we looked at a number of companies and we booked them into two different groups. The first group was really those folks who were just acquisition-based. So the only numbers that were improving in their business were their acquisition numbers. Their retention, their monetization, they were either stagnant or just actually getting worse. We compared that to balanced growth customers, where all three of those layers were actually improving constantly. And what's fascinating is, as you can see here, those folks who had that balanced growth intuitively were actually growing double the rate as those who were acquisition-focused. But the other piece here is that basically those acquisition-focused customers, or those folks that are out there, they're actually growing, but it's diminishing that power. And the reason for this is that if you look at the microeconomic impact, meaning if we isolate the effect of 1% improvement on something like acquisition versus 1% improvement on retention, what you'll notice is that monetization and retention are not only much, much better, like 2 to 4x impact of acquisition, but they're also getting much, much more powerful. And the reason is because of all that competition, all that density that's happening within the market. So really, if you're a $10 million company trying to be a $100 million company, or if you're a $100 million company that's expanding even further, what's fascinating is that your boss, or your boss's boss, is like, this is what we need to do, right? They're fighting a losing battle. When in reality, all the gold is really in retention and monetization. But this is what we care about, and this is what works. I could do that all day. Just go back and forth. All right. So to bring it back a little bit to like customer success is that the reason this should be so scary, like just from a philosophical standpoint, is that everything in your business, whether it's your sales team, your marketing team, your engineering team, your operations team, is basically used to either drive a particular customer to a conversion point or to justify that particular point in conversion. So a lot of this acquisition-based growth, a lot of this not focus on the customer, you're getting away with the fundamentals of what it means to actually be in business. So you have to know those customers. You have to know what makes them tick. And you ultimately need to know what's going to drive their growth. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but there's a ton of data that supports your jobs. And it's your job to essentially make sure that your firm, your company, is essentially making sure that they're not shooting themselves in the foot, because I'm sure there's some upside connected to your success and your company's success overall. And so really the biggest thing I want you to take away from this, and there's probably a little bit of point things here and there, is that acquisition isn't going to win. You have to focus on that customer, and focusing on that customer really drives down to your monetization and your retention that boost your overall retention through both of those particular levers. It doesn't work anymore the old way of doing things. The market's just different. And it doesn't matter how much money you raise. It just doesn't anymore. There are some spaces where you can raise $150 million and like you can still win, but those companies are dying more and more every single day, mainly because they just have that lack of focus. So I can't fix this overall. If they gave me 45 minutes, we could fix it. The 30-minute mark, that's like make you feel really, really bad mark. And that extra 15 minutes is like make you really love me, but we don't have that time. So how do we fix this, right? How do we fix it? The first place is really stop being a maverick. Not to quote John McCain, right? We can talk about McCain in Utah, right? That's cool, right? Okay. Let's make it political. That's my job. All right, yeah, anyways, half the room's like, yeah, half the room's like, stop it. Okay. Anyways, stop being a maverick. This is really, really important. 15, 20 years ago, like I said, you could have been a maverick. You could raise like, not even $100 million. You could raise like even a small amount of money and be really, really successful. Now, like, it just doesn't work. You have to have frameworks. You have to have process. And ultimately, those frameworks have to guide your particular customer focus and ultimately what's going to happen with those particular foci. In terms of like really fundamentally changing how you're building, really get back to those customer development fundamentals. We all love to retweet Paul Graham. We all love to retweet these articles about customer development. It's time to actually do it. Easiest thing to do, put a number on a whiteboard and just say, hey, product team, hey, marketing team, hey, customer success, whomever it actually is, you have to talk to this many people this month in a non-sales capacity about their problems, their wishes, their dreams, all the different things that are actually going to develop the right type of product. Third piece here, really quantify your target customer personas. This isn't something that necessarily requires a lot of money. It's something that you can just take a small amount of time each particular month and just chip away at the particular problem. It's really, really important to know who you're targeting because philosophically, those are the people that you're actually driving. And then even just from a mathematical standpoint, like those are the people that are going to streamline your funnel and ultimately make that conversion point really, really crisp. And then very, very tactical. We didn't talk about this a little bit too much, but get a value metric. So a value metric is what you charge for. It could be per seats, per 100 visits, per whatever. Those companies that have value metrics are growing at a much, much higher clip than those companies that have feature-based pricing. And the reason for that in particular is because that feature decline and willingness to pay. So as you add a new feature, even if you add the right feature, it's just not getting the right impact. So value metric-based pricing is really where to go. Go attack your delinquent churn. It's literally the easiest thing that you can do. Active churn has so many fragmented different pieces. Delinquent churn is like the easiest thing to attack. And then finally, stop discounting. That's the big thing that you need to focus on, especially from your sales team, because the problem is similar to that chart we saw before. It's like, oh, it's great to get the deal across the line, but then all of a sudden, a year later, you're responsible, and it's the sales team who kind of screwed that up, and good luck having that conversation a year later, right? Overall, again, like the market is making your job harder, and it's just something that you're going to have to deal with. And it's really, really going to take fundamentally changing your businesses overall. We'll share the slides, and I have a ton of different resources that I can share for free to teach you how to price, to help you with delinquent churn, those types of things. So if you're interested in that or interested in any data or anything like that, just patrick@priceintelligently.com to keep it simple. And we have a couple extra minutes. You guys weren't doing questions. Can we do questions?
We can take a few, yeah.
Burke, is that okay?
Yep, let's do it.
All right, let's do it. How do you handle delinquent churn? Well, we have a product we do have a product, but the biggest thing to keep in mind, and this is if you're going to do it yourself, treat them as a marketing channel, not as just some billing kind of collections agency. And what that means is that you need like an email drip that reinforces the value of what it is, because what you're really doing is you're going back and saying like, hey, you need to keep paying for this product, right? The other thing is that there's no one thing that's going to solve the particular problem, meaning like emails are going to get you probably between, I think it's around 15 to 22% of those folks back. In-app messages will get you another 10%. It really takes a lot of time to make sure your messaging is honed, and that's why you just treat them as a marketing channel. Make sure the opens, clicks, and ultimately the recoveries get taken care of. We've written a lot on this, so I can send it to you in particular, but if anyone else wants it, obviously, let me know. Yeah, so these included both B2B and B2C unless it was noted. They both trend macro level and even micro level, and some of the slides are the same. The difference is that if I split delinquent churn into B2B and B2C, B2B would be lower, B2C would be higher, not by much. And most of the other growth pieces, it's the same thing. The main difference from a value perspective between a B2B customer and a B2C customer is that oftentimes as a business in aggregate, the B2C customers just bring more noise. Because depending on what your price point looks like, you're just bringing in a lot of people who are going to churn out, and that kind of messes up your metrics. So most of this, we clean that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's actually worse with B2C. It's not drastically different, but it's technically worse. They're stacked on top. Yeah. 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 Yeah, so HubSpot and Marketo the question was, how do you quantify a persona? So HubSpot and Marketo did the right thing 10 years ago, and they're like, profiles, right? Do profiles, that makes sense, right? The problem is that most customer personas are created in a room with each exec being like, well, I think Billy, startup Steve, is less than $10 million, right? There's no like quantitative data. There's definitely instinct, don't get me wrong. Like you can get like pretty focused, but what we typically recommend doing, this is a longer process. We wrote a 140-page book on this specifically, because it really comes down to measuring value and pricing, all that kind of fun stuff. And so what we typically recommend doing is get a spreadsheet, no matter how big you are, get the right people in the room, just along the basically the x-axis or the columns, put like who you think your main buyers are. And they're typically split on role or size. You can do both, like an A/B cross, but if this is the first time you're doing this, just pick one, like role or size. And then along the rows, basically put most valued features, least valued features, most used features, least used features, because those two things are not the same. We've done a lot of work with accounting software. Most used feature, invoices. Like worst valued feature, invoices, right? Usage doesn't necessarily track with value. And then willingness to pay, and then your unit economics. The unit economics are super, super important because there are so many companies who are successful who all of a sudden when like they're trying to go to profitability realize, oh no, like we were targeting this $30 a month customer who were spending like $1,000 a month to get, and they're making $1 million on our platform, but like we're not like spending the right, getting the right customer, right? And then it's just like a process, right? Because you're not going to be able to do all of it at once. Like you can if you're in dire straits, but typically you want to attack one particular piece of that persona or one particular question around pricing every single quarter. So one quarter it might be like, hey, we want to optimize our annuals. Another quarter might just be like, hey, we just want to validate the willingness to pay across these personas. And then every time you collect that data and segment it down, your personas will improve over and over again. If you try to do it all at once, you're just going to, like, you're not necessarily going to fail, but you have a high risk of failing. But yeah, it's a process. Pricing's a process, personas are a process as well, and they'll evolve, right? Because you might be like, oh, we want to go after enterprise now, or hey, we want to go after SMB, stuff like that. Good question. Any other questions? I have so many more dad jokes. Come on, guys. What kind of process do you move through to do value-based pricing? Great question. It's very similar to what I just talked about. Normally what we recommend doing is attacking, so pricing is not just the number on the page, but it involves the actual number you're charging, your packaging, which is super, super important, your value metric, and then your positioning. Those are kind of the main pieces. And then there's like a long tail of things like price localization, discounting strategy, things like that. So normally what we recommend doing, and you can do these theoretically on monthly sprints, but we recommend looking at, first quantify your buyer personas. So just do like not necessarily a deep study, but just like who are we selling to? Collect a little bit of willingness to pay data, and we can share like the actual process for that. Collect a little bit of feature data, and then all of a sudden just like know, all right, we're kind of between X and Y. We're not really sure, but we're between these two goalposts. And then from there, start to dig deep. I would start with packaging actually. The reason is because you probably have a lot of stuff, and you want to justify like, should we do feature differentiation? Should it just be value metric? And that's what that'll help with. Then I would do pricing, and then I would attack your value metric, depending on what you're trying to look for. But I'll share those resources so you can check it out. Great question. Anything else? Have I made you all feel bad? That was my job. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, cool. Well, thanks again for having me, and then obviously enjoy the activities which are up next. Thanks, guys.